Kia ora, good afternoon. In the past few minutes, the Wellington businessman at the centre of the country's largest ever Ponzi scheme has been sentenced to 10 years and 10 months in jail. There were emotional scenes as swindled investors told the Wellington District Court about the impact of losing their life savings. One News reporter, Georgina Ball, has been covering the case and joins us now live from outside the court. Georgina.
Well, we've just come out of court where that sentence was handed down. Now, David Ross has been sentenced to 10 years and 10 months in prison for carrying out what is New Zealand's biggest ever Ponzi scheme. He'll serve a minimum 5 years in prison for those crimes. Now, the court was packed today with investors who turned out to see what Mr. Ross would be given. There were very emotional scenes in court. 4 of those investors gave victim impact statements. A number of them had to hold back tears as they told David Ross exactly the impact his offending had had on their lives. One investor said to Mr. Ross, "Look me in the eye and have some guts," while he told him to, in his words, rot in hell. Another investor described huge losses as her and her husband had saved money for the future of her severely disabled child and were now left virtually penniless and having sleepless nights wondering how they were going to fend for themselves and their son in the future. The judge, when giving down his sentence, said, look, this is one of the worst kinds of offending we've seen, and commented on the enormous web of lies and deceit that David Ross had carried out during the 12 years that that Ponzi scheme was running for. Now, when those charges were read out, there was some reaction from those in the gallery, but there were also a lot of laughs during that sentencing as David Ross's lawyer told the court that Ross was now giving the shirt off his back to give all remaining assets that he has to investors. And just to sum up, the judges said, look, any reparations that those victims, 700 or so of them, will now get will be nothing compared to what they've lost. In fact, in his words, they will be just a drop in the bucket. So David Ross will remain in custody at Rimutaka prison. He's already served a bit of his sentence and he will continue to do that now for another 10 or so years, 5 years minimum.
Thank you, Georgina. That is Georgina Ball live from Wellington.
Swindlers David Ross and Bernie Madoff share a hell of a lot in common. Put a moustache on Bernard and they could both be brothers. They perpetrated their respective countries' largest Ponzi schemes, took advantage of lax policing by authorities despite warnings something was up, lax accountancy practices as well, portrayed themselves as financial gurus able to beat the markets and outperform their competitors, possessing an acumen and algorithm far larger companies would die for. They relied on an air of mystique to both attract clients and protect themselves from scrutiny. Neither bothered advertising, relying on simply word of mouth by clients to promote this financial guru that was making them all rich, at least on paper. New human psychology meant everyone wants more than they have, and keeping up with the Joneses or the Goldsteins was what drove the citizens of the well-off suburbs of Kandala and Jericho. Ross was so low-key he didn't even have a website, and when the proverbial hit the fan and clients wanted their dosh back, he was able to hide behind his lack of computer savvy. Madoff had one of his sons fronting the IT department. When he faced the music as one of the last men standing, he hung himself. He relied heavily on their clients never asking the hard questions like, what is my money going into? Where exactly? Detracted the attention away from the bottom dollar on the statement and not where it came from. Made sure no two investors got the same statement. From their perspectives, Ross and Madoff were making it look as if they were micromanaging their funds when it was all fictitious. Lived the high life, had the best of everything, swanned around in high society, and in Ross's case, drank and ate at the same swanky restaurant virtually every day of the week. That's Ross's humble digs staring back at you. Had clients who were friends and partied with them, went to birthdays and on holidays. Relatives were also a fair game. In the end, both came a cropper when the market plummeted during the GFC. The incoming money necessary to keep the strategy going dried up, and they had nowhere to run when investors wanted their funds. The duo seemingly oblivious of the lives they had traumatised. This is where the stories part dramatically in terms of punishment of fitting the crime. One died in North Carolina prison in April of 2021, 12 years into a 150-year sentence. At the point Bernie had taken his terminal breath, Ross had been out on parole for a year. He did 7 odd years of a 11 odd year sentence, which he began in 2013. Clearly one country treats a serious white-collar crime of this magnitude with the seriousness it deserves, and it's not NZ. The 71-year-old David Ross is able to resume his life with his fellow shareholder, his wife, whilst his clients had to fight a protracted battle against his bank, the ANZ, for negligence. That long legal battle between two-thirds of Ross's victims and the ANZ Bank was resolved in August of 2021, when investors accepted a confidential settlement from the bank. They were originally trying to claw back $50 million. It's fair to presume they settled for less. Ross was formerly an employee of the ANZ, by the way. Some of the investors who thought themselves lucky, those are the ones that took their money out before the Financial Markets Authority pounced, got the whole lot back, but they were later forced to relinquish some, if not all, to the investors who were not so lucky. There was never really any hope of getting back the magical returns Ross claimed he had made, just some of the initial or subsequent investment. In total, Ross lost his clients 115 million New Zealand dollars, whilst at the same time collecting 30 million in fees. There were around 900 odd investors and 1,720 accounts. Investors into the inappropriately named Ross Asset Management, RAM, got really rammed and got a report every 3 months. Virtually all the purported assets and supposed trades went into and out of via a company called Bevis Marks. If you Google Bevis Marks, which I did, you will come up with a London synagogue. It's London's oldest. There's also a commercial development, which is on your screen in the same city. Google further and you get Bevis Marks Investments, and then you get a company set up in Gibraltar linked back to guess who? In the wash-up, it was discovered that out of the 450 million that went into Bevis Marks, there were no records it made any trades at all. As far as Ross's clients were concerned, the phantom 450 million portfolio they belonged to was invested overseas, 98% in Canada, United States and Australia. A breakdown of the respective company fortunes reflected in their share prices, all of which could be corroborated by anyone with access to the internet. Receivers initially found 23 million in an account that purported to have 450 mil. As far as his clients knew, Bevis Marks was an offshore brokering company. Overall, Ross Asset Management reported profits averaging 30 million a year between June 2000 and September 2012. To make things appear above board, some of the punters' investments did on paper go down, but overall David Ross's amazing expertise meant they were able to consistently beat the market. In doing so, current investors stayed put, some even stuck more money in, and new ones came on board. Ross Asset Management accounts were never independently audited. That only happened when PricewaterhouseCoopers were called in as receivers, and they only needed a couple of weeks to see the deficit and dire situation for anyone who had put money in. Any real trading Ross did engage in were in high-risk equities, the boom and bust that are mining and minerals. In 2008, the metals and mining markets went down between 25 to 40% depending on the market. To have so much exposure in one sector of the equities market, a volatile one at that, is a recipe for disaster in the medium to long term. That's why the portfolio was so heavily weighted towards Canada and Australia. Ross was known to engage in similar high trading in previous incarnations in the New Zealand finance industry. Before starting Ross Asset Management in 1989, Ross worked as the portfolio manager for Leadenhall Investment Management. Leadenhall's motto was, "If the market is not there, we go and make it." So much for that. Leadenhall crashed and burned in the share crash of 1987 due to an overexposure in another sector, the New Zealand property market.
Sorry to interrupt the video. My name is Nella. At least it was before I was murdered by my loser boyfriend in 1987. He wouldn't be caught for another 24 years. Thanks only to a stray kangaroo wandering out onto the road. If you want to hear the whole story, it is in the description below. Now back to this one.
What was Ross's spin on all of this? And take what you will from what you're about to hear in terms of his spin. Now on your screen is a grain of salt under an electron microscope. Initially Ram was making money, approximately for the first decade or so, he said. His good run of fortune came to an end, and rather than declare the truth, that is to say he had lost money, he doubled down. Like a horse racing punter who loses on every race and then keeps doubling down on the subsequent races on the horses with higher and higher odds in an effort to at least break even. By the year 2000, Ross Asset Management was all but a Ponzi scheme. There was never any way he could have traded out legally. Madoff ran his scheme for 17 years and Ross for 12. This is what the judge at the case, Dennis Barry, said about Ross at his sentencing.
You stole from the people who trusted you with their life savings. You constructed an enormous web of increasingly complex deceit to maintain this illusion that you were a skilled and trusted advisor and benefactor. The cold, hard reality is that you were a liar and a thief.
None of what came out in court, victim impact reports, deceit on a grand scale, penetrated Ross's hide. The 63-year-old appealed his 10 years and 10-month sentence as being too harsh. Unreasonably crushing was the term used by his lawyer, Diddums. Bernie Madoff, in comparison, wasn't eligible for parole till he was 220. The only winners in these situations are, of course, the lawyers and accountants. At an earlier probation interview, he stated he's broke and will be living on his pension, found God and has the support of his church. If you remember the earlier news report from the tally at the beginning, you may recall it wasn't likely Ross was destined for heaven, according to at least one angry victim. Perhaps the church there can run a sausage sizzle or two for the victims. I don't believe for a moment Ross is at all sorry for himself. Perhaps, like Madoff, Ross's victims are serving life sentences, and to show over a decade later nothing has changed in respects to lax accounting overviews and investor protections. In 2021, another large homegrown Ponzi scheme came to light, that of Cantabrian Kelly Tonkin. His company, Penrich Global, took $80 million from 180 investors. He got 8.5 years, likely to be out in 5. So thanks for tuning in today. A special thanks to the nice person who placed the recent video on Darwin's journey to New Zealand on some form of social media. That small act has so far gained me 4 subscribers and a new audience. Sharing is caring, people. Remember to be careful with your dosh. If it's too good to be true, likely it is. I will spot you next time. Thanks for tuning in, and bye for now.